Hello everyone, I am DK Illustrations, and in this video we're going to go over my painting process from start to finish of my most recent illustration titled The Carrion Queen. So, without further ado, let's get started. Also, I will be picking a random subscriber that can send me their work for a free paint over for a future video. More details in the description below. Let's get started. This video will be very helpful to all the artists out there who are tired of doing studies and feel like they're ready to tackle a little bit more challenging and original, such as a finished illustration, which is exactly what happened to me. I felt that I was doing way too many studies and I needed to do something a little bit more creative, using all the tools that I had learned with my studies and my practices on my own time. I do want to put a disclaimer that this is just my process and there are a ton of artists out there who do it differently. But, well, with that being said, let's get into the first part of the painting, which is the thumbnail. The thumbnail being the first part of the processing when it comes to illustration is a ton of fun to do. It's where you get to exercise your creative muscles, experiment with what you want to do for illustration. For the Carrion Queen, I wanted the figure to be very centered in the painting. I did, of course, experiment, as you can see in the background. I did experiment with different angles. In one, the figure is standing in the top left, which that makes that the focal point. However, I felt like the painting wasn't balanced enough, so I ended up going for the more straightforward approach, which is to put the figure in the center of the composition. That is a bit standard, but you can execute it really well if you know what you're doing and you use all the elements in the composition to reinforce and to make the focal point stand out. Since I was settled on the pose that I wanted to achieve, rather than doing what is more standard, which is to put the figure in different poses, since I really wanted the figure to be in this sitting pose, that's why the elements that are changing from one thumbnail to the next is mostly the background elements, such as the hyenas, the vultures, which reinforce that idea that she, as well as the animals that are with her, eat the flesh of their animals, which is the kind of like the storytelling aspect of the illustration. You can see that one of the illustrations has already some shading done into it. I did that to kind of like play around with some of the lighting that I was going to be doing, but that's something that I went more in depth once we get into the actual collapse of the piece. I also wanted to mention that although the thumbnail is an essential portion of the creative process for an illustration, it is by no means something that you feel like you have to do necessarily. There are several ways that you can do it. I know of several artists, including one which is one of my favorites. His name is Peter Polach, or Apterus. He just goes straight into the painting. He does a rough draft of the drawing and then he just goes into the actual painting with colors and everything. But I feel like from my personal perspective, it is very difficult to do, and it's way easier to fix your mistakes when you're early into the creative process and to plan out what you're going to be doing. Of course, it's very important to also know don't use the thumbnailing as a kind of like as a rule, just use it as a guideline. Once I am finished with the thumbnail, I am ready to go into the drawing. I like to lift the small image that I did for the thumbnail and actually enlarge it and put it into the actual canvas that I'm going to be using for the painting. This is done to kind of like avoid that blank canvas fear that many of us artists have. This gives you like a starting point from where to work on. Just lower the opacity on that and then create a drawing on top of it with the fixes on the anatomy, the perspective, and everything that needs to be done from the fundamentals to create a successful painting. I often do several drawings on top of the thumbnail. Usually 2 is enough for me to get a good grasp of what I'm going to be painting. This is a very important part of the process since, as the old saying goes, you can only paint as good as you can draw. So definitely take your time with the drawing process, don't rush it, make sure that you're looking at your reference images so that you have a well planned out painting before you dive into colors. After the drawing is done, I like to do a few iterations in black and white, nothing too detailed, just to test what sort of lighting I am going to be going for. This part of the process should only take you about 30 minutes at most. This way you can really see what the painting is going to be looking like from afar. I have these 2 images here of the black and white stage. Like as you can see, it's not in too detail. The one that I was going for is the darker one. The reason why I chose it is because although the other one was a more standard way of doing the painting, and her face was kind of like covered by the headgear that she was wearing, which is just a skeleton of an animal, it felt too bright. And since this painting was supposed to show this twisted figure feeding on dead animals, and I felt like the night setting was going to be more impactful, and it was going to serve the storytelling aspect of the painting a lot more. Of course, this added some challenges to the piece because depicting a night scenario is often a little bit more difficult, especially if the spotlight was going to be focused on her lower half and including the ground that she was standing on, which meant that I had to be a little bit more creative to make the face stand out. But it was a really fun challenge, and I think I did a pretty good job executing it. Taking advantage of the digital medium, put the drawing in multiply, and I put it on the top most of Photoshop, so it's visible even if when I get started with the painting. This allows me to experiment a lot with the colors that I have. It's very important to know that if you feel like something is off, it's most likely because it is. Trust your artistic instincts, and you have to be more focused on getting the values right. Because the values is what is going to make or break the painting. As you can see, in the early stages I was experimenting a lot with what kind of color palette I was going for. I ended up switching the colors a lot for the figure and the background because I felt that the colors were being a little bit too distracting for the piece, particularly for a nighttime painting. At this stage I also had the painting that I did earlier, the one in black and white for the lighting test. I even have it open on a separate window so that I can take a look at it and make sure that I'm adhering towards that early idea that I had for the lighting. I also am making sure that I am looking at my reference so that if I don't know how something looks, I am looking it up on the internet. A good rule of thumb for that idea is that if you are painting something and you feel like you are not sure what to do, or you start to guess how it looks like, it's time to stop and look it up on the internet. You can make sure that you're drawing it and painting it in the most accurate way possible. An advice that a lot of artists usually give is to work on the entire piece at once. I am kind of doing that on this painting in particular, but since I was fairly certain of what kind of color palette I was gonna go for, once I got most of the painting down for the background, I decided to focus on the figure itself and refine it until she kind of stood out. This helps me kind of see where the painting stands in terms of value distribution. So I spent, I would say, half of the process just focusing on the figure and making sure that she was a little bit detailed, not too detailed, of course, and there were some portions that I later addressed once I was a little bit further into the painting itself. And then of course I went to the background and did some of the elements on it before going back to the figure and polishing it more. Throughout the time lapse you will see me zoom out a lot and as well as flip the canvas from left to right. This is done to refresh my eyes and see the piece from a different point of view. This usually helps in catching mistakes that you would otherwise miss because you spend too many hours looking at the same painting and your brain kind of gets used to the way that it looks and you don't see the mistakes anymore. I did try to be a little bit more creative with the colors that I was using for the background because I felt that it was looking too bland. So I used this blue hue on the background to use kind of like as an ambient light so that the trees would stand out in the back, and it also enhances the silhouette because the blue is a lighter tone than the figure itself, so it creates the silhouette. And if you look at it from afar, it looks the figure stands out, which is what you want for the main focal point. So even though she's in the dark and she's not being hit by a direct light source, she is still visible in the composition. From this point forward, it's just a matter of painting and making sure that all the elements in the composition are working together. This is usually the portion of the painting that takes the longest. I make sure that I am also using enough reference pictures like I mentioned earlier. This painting usually, I think it took me 20 to 30 hours in total, with some more time spent adjusting some little details and making sure that the values and the hues are accurate. Well, with that being said, I hope that you enjoy the rest of the time lapse, and I will be back at the end. this is it. This is the final illustration. Thank you all so much for watching, and remember to subscribe to receive a free paint over. This painting was a lot of fun to work on and challenging as well. I did learn a lot from working on it, and I hope that you did too with this video. I am really excited to bring you all more videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.